West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin pressing the pause button on the Democrats' $3.5 trillion spending bill. It's really closer to $5. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed, he writes this: instead of rushing to spend trillions on new government programs and additional stimulus funding, Congress should hit a strategic pause on the budget reconciliation legislation. While some have suggested this reconciliation legislation must be passed now, I believe that making budgetary decisions under artificial political deadlines never leads to good policy or sound decisions. Joining me now, Wisconsin Congressman, member of the House Armed Services and Transportation and Infrastructure Committees, Mike Gallagher. Also joining the conversation all morning long, Patrice Leon-Wuka and James Freeman. Great to see all of you. Congressman, this op-ed from Joe Manchin, why now, do you think? What's in the timing?
Well, we last week in the House passed the $5 trillion framework, which is really sort of a rules vote that allowed the reconciliation process to go forward. So the ball is now in the Senate court, and they're going to reconvene before we can reconvene again in 3 weeks. So I think now, having previously supported a procedural move forward on the $5 trillion spending bonanza, Joe Manchin is now realizing, well, I may actually have to vote on some of this stuff for real, and so staking out some territory. Listen, I'm glad he's saying that we should pause and shouldn't move forward. I think the Bernie budget is going to have a severe inflationary effect. I think it's going to be incredibly problematic. And beyond just the dollar number spent, it represents just a massive expansion of U.S. federal government power over the states and all of our individual lives. And so I think it's a bad move, and I hope Senator Manchin stays firm on this position that he staked out.
James Freeman, jump in here. I want to point out that we found out this week in the Medicare trustees report, which the Wall Street Journal has written about, that the Medicare Hospital Trust Fund will run out of money in 5 years. At that time, the revenue coming in will only be able to cover 91% of the cost. So Americans are staring at an immediate 9% cut in the benefits paid out by the Hospital Trust Fund. But instead, the Democrats want to make it bigger. They want to add more and more benefits.
And for what purpose? I think that's what is really interesting. One of the things that's interesting about this Manchin op-ed, and Congressman, I'd like your thoughts on this, is Manchin talks about how they came up with this big number. It wasn't as big as Bernie wanted, but it's still big, $3.5 to $5 trillion. Before they wrote all the details of what it would be spent on. And he just made the very straightforward point that if this was really so urgent, wouldn't you identify the needs first and figure out what was the solution to address them, as opposed to a number you wanted to spend and then figure out what to spend it on later?
Congressman?
Well, here's the purpose, and I hate to be cynical, but, you know, I've now been in Congress for 5 years, so I've learned a few things. The purpose is getting reelected, right? Let's just spend as much money as possible that helps us get reelected. It's not to actually fix the structural imbalances in these programs. I mean, we lead the developed world in spending per capita on our healthcare system, but people aren't getting healthier, right? We've had negative trends in terms of life expectancy, and so it's highly illogical to assume that you can simply pump as much money as possible through the existing broken bureaucracies that were built decades ago and get better outcomes. And yet that's what the progressives are proposing to do. And make no mistake, this is the progressive wing of the party dictating terms, and Speaker Pelosi fears a revolt from the progressives in the House. And so, again, bad policy. I hope we can pump the brakes, take a step back, have a more measured approach, focus on what's truly essential, not on the spending bonanza. But that's what's driving it, in my opinion.
James and Congressman, doesn't this sound like how Joe Biden handled the Afghanistan withdrawal? You know, he had you write the speech that you're going to give on the 9/11 anniversary about we're out of Afghanistan, and then you do reverse engineering. You back into the plan, because you start with all the troops are out, and then you kind of back into it. You saw the disaster that was. Speaking of Afghanistan, they're facing backlash, Congressman, by refusing to elaborate on what happens to the Afghan refugees who fail the administration's vetting process. This is President Biden's approval rating has fallen to the lowest level of his presidency following the Afghan foul up in pulling out. This is according to a new poll from NPR, PBS, and Marist. Your thoughts on all of this, Congressman?
Well, the president went on national TV and called this an extraordinary success. That is the lie of the decade. This is, 13 American service members dead is not a success. Hundreds left behind enemy lines is not a success. Thousands of our allies abandoned effectively to death. Billions of dollars worth of military equipment. This is a humiliating, historic fiasco, not a success. And so for the administration to try and spin it as a news cycle to be managed rather than as a matter of life and death and American honor is quite shameful. And I think your average American, and what might explain those polls, even the American who supported getting out of Afghanistan, is still disgusted with the incompetent way in which the withdrawal was effectuated and the idea that we're leaving our people behind, to say nothing about the absence of a plan for vetting. So the whole thing has been a fiasco. And now the administration refuses to even tell us the precise number of Americans and LPRs that they think are left behind. This is an absolute shame on our nation right now, and a failure of leadership at the highest levels of the White House.
Congressman, thank you so much for being here this morning. Congressman Mike Gallagher, always a pleasure.